Hello, my name is Damon Willick, chair of the art history program at Loyola Marymount University. Welcome to the start of the 9th year of KaleidoLA, the Department of Art and Art History's annual speaker series. Before we start today's roundtable discussion, I'd like to first thank all of my colleagues in the department, as well as the College of Communication and Fine Arts, for their continued support of KaleidoLA. In particular, I'd like to acknowledge the support and assistance of the Dean, Bryant Alexander, Chair of Studio Arts, Sari Cho Dobson, and Department Administrators Arturo Mejia and Stancia Harvey for all of their assistance. It's my pleasure to introduce our three speakers for today, Kristin Juarez, who is Research Specialist at the Getty Research Institute, Rebecca Peabody, the head of research projects and academic outreach at the GRI, and Glenn Phillips, senior curator and head of exhibitions and modern and contemporary collections at the GRI as well. We are so privileged to get the opportunity to hear their thoughts about co-curating the exhibition, Blondell Cummings' Dance's Moving Pictures, currently on view at Art in Practice, as well as their research and writing that will appear in the forthcoming catalog on the seminal choreographer and video artist Blondell Cummings. We'll have time at the end of their roundtable discussion to answer your questions. And if you can please write those questions in the Zoom chat, we'll address those at the end. I'm now going to pass the Zoom screen over to Rebecca Peabody to get us started.
Thank you, Damon, for those introductions, and thank you everyone for joining us today. Kristin, Glenn, and I have been working together to curate this exhibition for a couple of years now. And in the course of that, we have been meeting for an hour and a half, twice a week or more, as the occasion requires. So we've had a lot of time to talk about the exhibition and work through it. Yet in spite of that, there are a number of aspects that I've wanted to discuss with them further, questions I've wanted to ask, areas of personal interest that have come up that I've wanted to know more about. So what we thought we would do is take this opportunity to talk a bit more about the exhibition with each other and dig into some of those issues. So we are going to have a moderated conversation amongst the three of us, and then we'll open it up to a larger Q&A towards the end, as we would really love to hear back from our audience as well. So I will start with a couple of questions. I'll send my first one over to Glenn. Glenn, you have such a long and storied history as a curator, and a curator working specifically with film and video and moving image art. I've often wondered throughout the process of this exhibition, in what ways it was similar to the other projects that you've done before, and in what ways it was perhaps different and unlike other projects you've done before.
Sure. Thanks, Rebecca. Well, you know, every show is completely different, no matter how much you might begin thinking that it might be similar to another project. And the similarities are often in terms of your medium and technology and kind of the challenge, like with the video exhibition, the challenges of just getting everything to work and be visible. But in terms of the specifics of how you put the exhibition together, that winds up changing so much from project to project. And I think that with this project, there were a few factors that really had the biggest impact on our decision-making of how we wanted to frame the exhibition. And I think probably the biggest one in this case is the fact that Blondell Cummings passed away in 2015, which means we could not talk with her about what she wanted. We couldn't ask her questions when they came up, and you know, we couldn't collaborate with her on how the exhibition was going to be put forward. So I think that put one of the primary burdens or questions on us, which was wanting to really make sure that it felt like she was in the show. And it might seem obvious, you're doing a solo retrospective, obviously she's in the show, but it's not as easy as that. In part because of a second factor, which is almost everything in this show is older lower res standard definition video. Some of these tapes were recorded on VHS tapes. They're not high resolution. Sometimes they're filmed from a distance. You can't always see her face very clearly, for instance. And so thinking about how to, really make sure that people could see her, that affected some of the decisions as to which things might be on a larger screen or highlighted more. And it also led to decisions. If you go through the show, you see that just about every single piece, it has a label, but also a quote from her, beginning with the title wall. So wanting to make sure that her voice was really in there. So those are, you might not do things like that in every single show, but that framing was very important. I think the third, really important factor in this one was also the fact that this is her first solo museum show. There's been wonderful scholarship about Blondell Cummings, but that doesn't mean that she's a household name. And I think for a lot of our audiences, this may be the first time they're ever seeing her work, or they might only know a couple of the most well-known pieces. And in instances like that, you want to think about context so that people can know more of her story, but also not overwhelming the audience. So I think that one of our decisions in this show, there are some key pieces that are presented in their entirety. And then other pieces are excerpts from really special moments in the pieces. So for someone coming in and this is their first time learning about Blondell Cummings, you don't just immediately feel overwhelmed and feel that there's no way I can do this. It's, most of the clips are just a few minutes long, and then you can really sit down and watch a piece like Chicken Soup all the way through. So trying to find that right balance of an exhibition that feels very full without feeling overwhelming. Those were the types of questions that we obsessed over. Sometimes you want to do another type of show where you just, put it all out there and embrace that kind of chaos and dynamism, but that's not what this show should be. So hopefully that answers the question.
It does, yes, thank you. And it really points out the balance, the importance of finding a balance between coverage to establish enough of a picture to cover an oeuvre that is so varied and enduring, and yet creating moments of focus for the viewer as well. So the opportunity to see broadly across her body of work, but to go deep into a few pieces as well. That's there's a lot of delicacy involved in that. Kristen, a question that I've had in mind for you that I've wanted to ask you about for a long time now, and I'm really grateful for the chance to do it now, is if you could talk with us a bit about your work with Blondell Cummings and how it's extended now through a few different projects. Because if I understand correctly, you were working on Blondell Cummings as part of your dissertation before you joined us on the exhibition at the Getty, and then carried that through, and we worked on the exhibition and the companion volume. So 3 major and each very different scholarly projects now with Blondell Cummings as a connecting theme throughout them. I'd love to hear more about that.
Thanks, Rebecca, for that question. It's something that has really been an incredibly special opportunity to think in different ways and in different kinds of expressions with Blondell Cummings' work. So with my dissertation, Blondell Cummings is kind of, she's the introduction. She is actually the framing of how I think about gesture and how I think about gesture as it moves into video art and choreographic experiments with video art. And to begin with, my kind of introduction to Blondell Cummings came, I think, at this intersection that we are really working with now. I saw her Chicken Soup exhibited as part of We Wanted a Revolution at the Brooklyn Museum. And so I saw it within this art historical context that was looking at Black women artists working in the late 60s into the 80s across disciplines. I also learned about her through her collaboration with the experimental filmmaker and video maker Shirley Clarke in A Visual Diary through an advisor, a film studies advisor. And then I also got more kind of personal context around her impact in New York City dance at my time working at Danspace Project, when they told me, Blondell Cummings was at every show. She was a fixture in our audience and a mentor to many dancers coming up through the 80s into the 2000s. And so that I think is part of what's so fulfilling now, that we're kind of really pulling on those threads, inserting her into an art historical context and her relationship to performance art and to video art, by being in conversation with her peers and her collaborators, and creating a document and a record in our book of their memories of her. And then of course, the research guide that we've created that is really contextualizing her practice within performance, visual art, and moving image studies. So that's kind of a through line. One thing that I thought about a lot is that, I did a formal analysis of actually this work that's on screen right now, Commitment to Portraits, which is the made for TV video Chicken Soup, and of A Visual Diary, which is her collaboration with Shirley Clarke. And I have like a footnote in it that was like, we don't know how this collaboration between Shirley Clarke and Blondell Cummings came to be. We'll only know when we get a chance to look at her archives. And like, lo and behold, we had the opportunity to look at Blondell Cummings' archives, and she had a recording of a lecture she was giving to a class at NYU talking about dance on camera. And she talks about how she worked with Shirley Clarke. So this kind of exhibition research and the commitment to learning more about her practice really has like fleshed out a whole big picture of her practice beyond form, and thinking about collaboration. So that was really important. And I think the kind of final note I'll say is that we made the move in our didactics and our writing about Blondell Cummings to refer to her as both a choreographer and a video artist. And that was, I think, a really major shift that and a call to her practice that I don't think had been made before. It was a hunch I had throughout my dissertation, because I was looking at this kind of formal experimentation and commitment to how things are filmed beyond performance documentation, and something that just really came to light through this exhibition process.
You raised two really great examples, Kristen, but I just want to follow up on quickly before I turn the mic over to someone else to ask questions. It's commonplace in academic work to establish the scope of one's project and then to do one's best to fulfill that scope, but to gesture towards the end of that project towards those areas that have been revealed that need further work. The next generation of scholars will attend to this, or these questions were raised that we haven't been able to answer here, but hopefully they will inform the next iteration of scholarship. And the two examples you shared with us, uncovering the nature of the collaboration with Shirley Clarke, and then the hunch you had in writing your dissertation that Blondell Cummings was a video artist, and then being able to reveal that as more than a hunch later. Two really interesting examples of having made those gestures towards what the next generation of scholarship would uncover, and then being part of the next generation of scholarship to actually uncover those. So I think that's just so interesting and such an unusual opportunity for a scholar. And it makes me wonder, what do you think is next? What questions are in your mind as we wrap up this phase of Blondell Cummings research that you hope the next group of researchers uncover?
Wow. I think actually Glenn touches on this, and I'll let him elaborate a bit, but something that really kind of came up in our publication, in our commissioned essay by Sampara Aranque, is thinking about how Cummings she recycled her gestures. And so you will see gestures in one dance kind of keep coming up across decades of work. And I think that really, and you see it in performance, you see it in video. And so I think that kind of movement of gesture, of us assemblage art, as Aranque kind of describes it, I think kind of understanding how dance vocabulary has impacted a moving image vocabulary, as well as a visual art, performance art vocabulary, I think is going to be really, I'm really excited to work on it. And I'm excited to see what people do with that.
I would say also, I mean, I totally agree with all of that. But then sort of stepping back to the video artist question for a minute, I mean, Kristen has uncovered a lot and other scholars have uncovered, but right now it's just like these little breadcrumbs that point to her history as a video artist. But it is significant because she studied video, she trained, she, as a profession, was documenting choreography in the early part of her life, working out of a studio in the Westbeth building right next to Merce Cunningham. You know, she was involved in documenting a lot of pieces, and you know, it became clear to us in looking at her work, you could see how aware she was of the camera, and you could see that at times she was choreographing for the camera, which is a very specific type of choreographing. You're not thinking just about the space around you and in front of you where an audience would sit. You're thinking about the frame of the screen and what's visible on screen. And, you know, so as Kristen said, we very consciously always refer to her now as a choreographer and video artist. How that translates into the show, you know, there are also a couple of little like art moves we made, I guess, that you kind of want to subliminally indicate video art to people. So one of the first tapes in the show, which is called First Tape, you know, we built out a little space for it that is the sort of triangular space that just, I don't know, it has a little more of a video art feel. And we purchased more of a video art monitor than the kind of smaller televisions that you see elsewhere in the exhibition. And it just puts you more in the frame of a museum exhibition. Or we utilize the front space next to the storefront windows as a sort of corridor where you have this almost Bruce Nauman experience. You know, we would do little things like that where we thought we could. That's also where you get into this point where you can't ask the artist. So, you know, there was one thing we were thinking about for a piece called The Ladies and Me, where we sort of experimented with it as a multi-channel piece so that you could see all of the different sections at once. And it looked incredible, but we just never could feel sure enough that she would not have objected to that, you know, and that's another one of the things that you negotiate when, you know, you're bringing your own opinions and point of view to a project, and finding that line where you feel, okay, this is okay, we can take enough liberties here, but not trying to turn her into something else. And turning The Ladies and Me into a video installation maybe was a step too far, even though she may have loved it. She may have loved the notion to recycle it into a new piece for today, but it's hard. Yeah, it's hard sometimes to know where to draw the line, and maybe it's better, you know, to just let people see the work without going in and changing it.
Glenn, I love that point you made about taking more of a video art perspective in some of the installation decisions and showing her work as one would show a video art show, juxtaposed, not your words, so correct me if I'm wrong, but juxtaposed with some other decisions that were more about showing dance the way one would show it in a more specifically dance-oriented show. That seems to me like another area that requires some delicacy and quite a bit of knowledge of both worlds to be able to move back and forth between them. And something that I, as a first-time curator, witnessed on the ground working alongside you, but I'd love to hear more about that, how you interwove those two viewing or presentation traditions.
Some of the pieces are documentation. And the point of that performance that you see on the screen was for the audience that you can also sometimes see or hear on the screen. And they put a camera, to document it, to record it, to make a record. Other videos in the exhibition, the camera was the audience, and the frame of the camera was the space. And the video is not a document, it is the work. And we have those mixed together, sometimes in the same room, or when you go into the screening room, it's kind of not quite alternating, but almost alternating between documentation and finished video art pieces. So I think, we just wanted to have a couple moments where, it really felt like video art rather than a documentation station, let's say.
Mm-hmm.
I want to just add to that, something that you're saying, Glenn, kind of reminds me to pull back and look at like the role of these video documentation of performances and how we came to this exhibition. To start, we found in the kitchen archives within the GRI special collections that she was touring with the kitchen, and as a kind of promotion object, she was sharing videos of these of her performances to say, this is the kind of performance I can do at your space. If you want to commission me, this is how much it would cost with one dancer. I don't need any props. I don't need any lighting. Or if you want a different kind of show, this is what lighting and bringing additional dancers would be. So it had a kind of very practical role, kind of documenting her performance and how it was shared. And then there's also, and I think this is why it's so exciting that her archive is now within the special collections of the New York Public Library. Dance students, part of their work is to watch these documents. They watch them, they study them, they learn dances by watching, in some instances by watching these videos. So it has both a kind of like it had a promotional aspect to it and a kind of way that helped her tour. And then also this kind of study aspect that will continue now that it's housed.
That makes me think, jumping back a little bit to a thought I had while we were talking about the next steps we were hoping research would take. I was thinking about the impact that the circumstances of our research had on what we were able to see of Cummings' work, how we were able to make one visit, one profoundly impactful visit, but just one visit to the family's archives and select some videos to watch, not knowing that we were about to go into a lockdown and our ability to see them or to work with them again would be pretty much permanently interrupted at that point. So we pulled a selection and had them digitized and found amazing work and put together the story that we're sharing with everyone through the exhibition. But I'm also really looking forward to what that work means when it's put into the broader context of the rest of our digitized materials once those are available.
Yeah, we really only digitized a fraction of that archive. And at the time when we went, we thought that was our first visit of who knows how many. I think luckily at the time we wanted to make a really well-rounded selection, even though a lot of them would be, we were just guessing based on the titles of the tapes, but we wanted things from the earliest, to the latest. We wanted, famous pieces and less known pieces. Some of the pieces that are already out there circulating, we chose them anyway in the hopes that it might be a higher quality recording. But I think we had been thinking we would start with this selection and then we would go back at another time with targeted things that our research had uncovered for us. And that wasn't possible. So that was the other sort of factor that really determined the show, that the pandemic in a way decided it for us that this was going to be a 100% video show. We could have done another type of show and had posters and had photographic prints and had ephemera and letters and things like that, but we were never confident enough in the timing that we would be able to pull off alone. But the videos we had. And so we knew that no matter what, if we stuck with just video and then maybe including photography in the form of blow-ups and vinyls and images on a website, then we could proceed with the show. But that did mean it was going to be a specific type of show.
Mm-hmm. As you're sharing that, Glenn, it's occurring to me that's probably evident to anybody who's worked behind the scenes on an exhibition, but might not be evident to people who have not worked behind the scenes on an exhibition, the extent to which timing and availability and format and whether or not a loan could come through has an impact on the creative process and the kinds of decisions that are available, which in turn play into the kind of exhibition that comes out of them.
Yeah. I'm really glad it worked out that way because, the show feels pretty pure right now and it's just the work. And you can just walk in and see the work. And I think if we had introduced a lot of other types of material, even though those materials might be great, it would be a very different viewing experience. And it would ask for a different type of attention from the audience. And what we really want them to do is see this work and know more about it. So the archive can come later in a way.
Mm-hmm. And we have, in a way, I think through some of our other endeavors, we've provided that richness and contextualization in the ways that we could. I'm thinking of the faculty open house and all of the materials that have been put together with the early and current research on her, the oral histories, the reviews, the reprints. There's a lot of that kind of contextualization that we have put together via another mechanism so that viewers can have both that pure experience in the gallery, but have all of that rich contextualization as well.
Mm-hmm.
I've been holding on to the proverbial mic for a while now. Why don't I hand it over to somebody else?
Well, maybe I'll jump in with my question, and I sort of have a question for all three of us. I do a lot of collaborative curating. It's kind of become my primary methodology. My favorite part of a process is actually the conversations that you have with your colleagues as you all become specialists together. And when you're doing a project just by yourself, it's a little bit lonely. But we were lucky in this case because I think we were kind of unanimous on all of the selections, but that doesn't always happen. And so I often institute what's called the passion plea, which is if there's a work, even if everybody else hates it, you're willing to fall on your sword for it, then it gets in, right? We can add our passion pleas. We never got to that point, but I kind of want to know what your passion pleas would have been if everybody else were against you. So Kristen, maybe we'll start with you.
I want to just direct people to the PowerPoint right now because this is the work. This is just a couple boomers sitting around chilling. And I'll say that was work that I spotted when we were physically looking through material and was like, I've never seen this mentioned. What a title, like, let's just grab it and see what it is. So I think maybe that was my moment where I was like, this has to be digitized. And when we watched it, a few things came kind of into view. One is that you can hear these oral histories of women speaking about what it means to be past middle-aged and what it means, how their identity as women has shaped how it's changed, how they see themselves moving forward in their roles in society. And that use of oral histories, we learned, actually started with Cycle, the work that's up on the screen right now. From her earliest work, she started doing these community workshops where she was taking both gestures and stories from people to learn about how they feel about kind of universal issues. So aging is the one she takes up with in Just a Couple Boomers. And studying that work, you also see that she's, again, recycling gestures from The Ladies and Me, from Chicken Soup, and weaving them into an improvisational call and response with these oral histories. So for me, there's a funny moment in the middle where there's a projected belly dancing scene, which is, just, you have to just smile. It feels so odd and delightful. And that's the moment where I really wish we could talk to her about, because I'm sure that the story behind that is amazing. But that is the work that has really, really kind of stayed with me and shown her kind of commitment to collaboration and to community work. And that was made in 2002. She was in her late 50s. And, just committing to being a dancer as well as an educator and like a community worker. And it's just, that's my plea.
Well, of course, it's always, I think particularly in dance, I think it's important to show work from every stage of a dancer's career, because their movement vocabulary changes so much over time. But of course, in some ways, the whole field focuses so much more on youth. And so to have this piece that's, so much about aging, I mean, it's such a powerful piece. And I remember so vividly the first time we watched it. Rebecca, what's your passion plea?
My passion plea is Dada, which we have an image of. It'll come up in the rotation momentarily. And I'm grateful to you, Kristen and Glenn, for not making me fall on my sword for this, although I would have. It's not perhaps an obvious candidate for inclusion because it's very grainy, black and white, a little difficult to watch. And the dominant and almost exclusive sound is that of the baby in distress who's crying constantly throughout the full 6-minute excerpt. So it's not a particularly easy piece to watch or to listen to, but the minute I saw it, I felt I was just riveted. It tells the story of a single father, single in the sense that he's on his own with a young baby who's inconsolable. And in those 6 minutes, it captures a cycle that I think a lot of parents will be familiar with, where the father has moments of patience and unconditional love, and he has moments of exhaustion and moments of anger where he's getting close to some sort of edge. Here it is on screen now, getting close to some sort of edge that makes the viewers all uncomfortable, and then settles the baby back to sleep, leaves a quiet room, and then as soon as the door closes, the baby wakes up and starts crying again. So it's just a really profound evocation of a kind of deeply solitary experience for parents who have lived through those long, dark nights with a baby who's too young to remember, going through this wild swing of emotions and starting the cycle back again at the end of it. I was really compelled by the dance itself, but then additionally compelled by the fact that Blondell Cummings did not herself have children. but managed to choreograph this incredibly intimate experience that resonated really deeply for me in my capacity as a mother, and that she choreographed it for a man. It was a deliberate choice to have a male dancer in that role, which is not perhaps who we would socially expect to see in a primary caretaking position, but that was a choice that she made. So to see masculinity, fatherhood, gender, and the solitariness of that communal experience crafted so beautifully. It was a really moving piece for me. So thank you again for not making me fall on my sword. I'll connect it just very briefly to another piece we see on screen here, which is Meat and Potatoes. And I won't say as much about Meat and Potatoes, but that was the first piece in which I did a double take and thought, oh, that can't possibly be Blondell Cummings. But I thought it was her, but that's somebody else. Because she is so good at developing character and inhabiting it and demonstrating just really different ways of moving through the world through her energetic motion. So that piece really captivated me as well, and is another instance in which she is choreographing masculinity, not perhaps as the main point of the work, because there are many other things going on in that work, but another instance of that, which I think is a really interesting thread through her work.
Thanks, Rebecca. And for Dada, that was another one of the pieces that we kind of gave the video art treatment to, even though it really is a performance documentation. But it's possible that you could visit the show and miss it. So when you walk into Art and Practice, they have these beautiful like storefront windows, and there's a wall behind the window, and there's enough space that people can go in there. And most of their shows, they do a project in there, and sometimes it's a space that you can walk into, but maybe even more often than not, they design things that's meant to be viewed from the sidewalk. In this case, we're doing both. We installed some huge photographic blow-ups so that you see from the sidewalk, but you can walk down that corridor and then encounter the little video monitor at the end, and the way that the sound echoes down that hallway is kind of magnetic as you approach the monitor. I think it was a huge part of the piece, the sound, but we can't put that in the middle of the exhibition so that the only thing you hear on top of every single other piece in the show is the baby. And so it kind of gave this opportunity, to do an interesting treatment, definitely taking a liberty. I mean, it's, we have no indication that this is something that she would have ever done, but it really creates this arresting moment in the show. I think all of you should go see it and see what you think.
In a way, listening to you describe it that way, Glenn, it just kind of points out for me the fact that we've created an opportunity for a theatrical experience on the part of the viewer, because they will either be compelled or repulsed by the sound of the crying baby. And if they want to find out more, they have to walk down this long, narrow hallway, probably with a little bit of dread. What are they going to find at the end of it? And you've got to get all the way to the end before you see this tiny little screen. And then you've got to stand really close to it to see what's going on. So it compels a kind of, there's a whole kind of theatricality about the experience of seeing that work that's available for viewers as well.
Glenn, what's
maybe
yours?
I'll mention, should I talk about my passion piece?
Yes, please.
I guess. It's one I mentioned before. It's the tape called First Tape. And that's another case. This is probably the first time that tape has been seen since the mid-70s, because it was a half-inch open reel tape, I think. And the only reason we grabbed it was because it said First Tape. So seems like, why don't you start with that, right? This is probably one of her earliest pieces, and it's not a finished piece. It's in a way rehearsal footage where she performs the same sequence of movements 9 times over, 7 times in a studio and then twice outdoors, and each take, and she's working with another camera woman. And it's unclear what their collaboration is exactly. Like, it's unclear who's directing, or what each is bringing. But each take she does something a little different. She tries out a different outfit. She changes the movement a little bit. But the first thing that I think struck us about it is that it was 100% designed for the camera. And there's this amazing moment in it. There are a lot of close-ups, and there's this amazing moment where she sort of extended her hand, and then the camera is tracking her hand, and you can tell that it's moving. But what you can't tell the first time you watch it is that she's actually lying down on the ground. So by the time the camera moves out, she's suddenly on the ground, and you didn't see it happen. So it's this very clever, both choreographic but videographic move. That's an amazing sequence. And so seeing that and seeing how much she was thinking about the camera very early on, I mean, that's kind of making the video art or the video dance case in a way. But then the other extraordinary thing, and part of this we realized soon, and some of it was much later, but to see the number of moves in this very early tape that get elaborated in later performances. So, we see this moment when she's lying down. This is first tape. So on the left, when she's lying down, she starts doing that kind of facial choreography where she goes through a sequence of movements that you see so prominently at the beginning of Chicken Soup, as well as so many other of her pieces. And then there's this really athletic moment at the end where she's swinging her arms and her body back and forth. And it's a great moment in this video, but then that gets kind of spectacularly elaborated in probably the climactic sequence of The Ladies and Me, happening 6-7 years later or so. So to see here in this early tape, which might be the earliest tape we have, it's the earliest one we found. There could be others, but to see that so much of the later work was right there from the very beginning, and it's always so rewarding to, particularly when you're working on a solo presentation, that moment when all of the elements start to click of what are the foundations of a practice, and how an artist, has those sort of prime ideas that they then continue to refine over time, and where that takes them. So to me, it's like the Rosetta Stone video in the exhibition.
I'll ask. I wasn't planning on asking this, but you've said something you said, Glenn, really sparked me. I'll ask you both, what do you think are the foundations of her practice? We've kind of talked about it in different ways. Now that we've seen the show, lived with it for a little bit, what are some of the main thrusts that you see in her work?
I've been thinking about this a lot lately. There are so many, but one that really speaks to me is the choreography of solitude. And this is obviously not something that would apply to all of her pieces, but in many of her pieces, there are moments that are lived alone, moments that would be otherwise unwitnessed, moments that wouldn't have a response from a community or from viewers because they are by their nature alone. I'm thinking of, again, Dada, but also In Night Stir, pieces that show really intimate experiences and invite us to view the beauty of them in different ways. And the fact that she incorporates movement that doesn't look like dance, that's more kind of everyday movements that we associate with those sorts of activities, and puts them in a dance context, I think really it asks us to see the beauty of those moments and to share them, to realize that they're shared human experiences, and to think about the gestures that move us through those experiences and the beauty of that as well.
Can I follow up on that question really quick, Rebecca, and to ask how you put that in the context of her as a Black woman, what it means in terms of, this is of course speculation and critical thought that I'm asking you to apply, but how her practice reflects on the construction of race and the specificity and the uniqueness and the universality that she's getting at.
Mm-hmm. Good question, a big one. I think I would, as a start to an answer, I would say that I feel as a viewer invited to move back and forth between worlds with her work, between very specific experiences that I can be invited into in different ways. And I'm invited to think of my own experiences that may connect with some of the ones that I'm seeing, but I'm also being invited to witness or share in experiences that I don't have. And I feel like her work asks me or allows me to move back and forth between those two ways of experiencing intimacy and personal experience. Yeah.
Thank you.
And I would say, and this is going back to the question of what some of her foundational elements are. And you know, as you both sort of mentioned, she's bridging these traditions. She was sort of equally trained within this modernist, postmodernist tradition, kind of coming out of Merce Cunningham or Martha Graham or Judson Church, and was, you know, a founding member with Meredith Monk, but also, you know, very well trained in Black modern and postmodern dance. And you know, you see those very abstract gestures, but what's so striking, you know, to me that you know, you would never see in other types of dance is that she's making these abstract gestures, but you get a feeling of what her state of mind is. You know, and it's not so common that you're watching a dancer and thinking about what she's thinking about in this, you know, maybe domestic setting or wherever, that she brings this state of mind, that she brings personas, you know, to her work, which is actually, I think this is the other thread that we could pull on more. You know, when you start looking at feminist artists in the 70s, and so many of them also begin to create these personas as a part of their practice, as a way to introduce states of mind, subjective thought, all these sort of feelings that had been so purged, right, in minimalism. You know, we see Blondell Cummings doing that as well. And what was the origin of that? What did make her feel that she could do that? Probably when most of her audiences, you know, might not have even been comfortable with that, or it might have felt too much like theater, or too much like, I think a lot of people at the time didn't really even know what it was, because it was quite different than what other dancers were doing. At the same time, and then this is, I think, the other foundational element, and which speaks to her virtuosity, she's doing this thing that there aren't a lot of precedents for in some ways, but there's such a focus on legibility and how to convey all of that so that someone who doesn't really know what it's about still can get it. And that's not easy. I mean, that's also going back to First Tape, where we see her doing the movements over and over again, but each time she refines it. So how you work that in so that people can sort of know that you have a frame of reference, and that's what you're bringing into the piece.
I have one more question for you, Glenn, and that's thinking about this show is ultimately an archival show, though that may not be the primary takeaway that people have. They'll see the work itself, but my question is kind of thinking about what it means to build an exhibition from an archive, and what it affords, and what you have to work with in order to make it not just an archival show, but a great show as well. Mm-hmm. And legible.
Yeah. Well, that's the challenge, you know, and it's the challenge with archive shows. It's the challenge with time-based shows. It's the challenge with any show that grapples with abstraction. you know, because it's, our audiences are never all on the same page. People are coming from so many different backgrounds, but you want to try to, you know, have something there for everyone. You know, I think that's part of the reason why in this show, you know, we focused on a lot of excerpts when it actually would have been less effort to just put the whole video on, right? That would have been easier. But then what are you asking your audience to do? Oh, there's just 17 hours of video. I hope you enjoy it. You know, that's not an introduction. That's just sort of dropping them into the middle of your little project and wishing them good luck. And, you know, so I think that in an exhibition, you try to focus attention, right? And one way to do that is, you know, with video, if you do choose an excerpt, it's kind of, you know, those are often the most special moments, and it helps your visitor have a better experience if they always walk in at one of the best moments, and they can kind of enjoy that more. And it allowed, with the screening program, which is about an hour long in the back gallery, and some of those are complete full pieces and some of them are excerpts, but you get walked from, you know, really early in her career all the way almost to the end. And that's one of the powerful things. You sort of see her in the different stages of her life, which is another way of reinforcing that we're trying to look at all of those stages, and you get to, you know, you can see them all in one sitting if you want.
Thank you. I think at this point, maybe we can open up for a couple questions. I see Damon's pop back up.
Oh my God, thank you so much. What I could have listened to the three of you talk about this exhibition and talk about your experiences curating it and researching Blondell Cummings for another hour. Thank you so much. And I hope that this conversation becomes part of the archive, not only of the exhibition and artists, but also just of the GRI's role in making sure that figures and history like this gets spotlighted beyond the dates of the exhibition. I don't see any questions in the chat, but I have a question for you. We have about 7 more minutes. Glenn, you talked about the dancers' movement vocabulary evolving over time as their bodies age. Do you see a similar change over time with Blondell Cummings' use of video as the technology advances?
Well, I think that, you know, over time, she tended to collaborate with other videographers more. And we know that it was earlier in her life that she sort of professionally was doing that documentation herself. I think this is funny, it's sort of a different answer than you might expect, but we do find in some of the talks that she gives, she expresses almost this resignation that when you work with another videographer, they're never going to choose the moments that you thought were the best shots. They're going to choose the ones that they want. And so I think actually maybe what I would infer from that, which is something maybe many of us experience as we grow older, you learn how to give up a little bit of control in exchange for the value of spreading labor between you know, collaborators, which can allow you to do more. And so rather than obsessing over every detail, maybe you can do more things, but hand over some of that responsibility to a videographer. And she worked with very good videographers. And I don't think she was complaining about their work. She was just noting they're going to do what they need for their video. And it's not necessarily what I thought was the best gesture that I'd made. It might not make the cut for one reason or another.
Just to add to that quickly, one thing she says is, recording her work was a way of extending its reach. And so she was like committed to doing that and committed to the ability for the work to move without her. So that's just something I think we kind of see in this body of tapes, that it was just this like ongoing commitment to just making sure there's a recording so that it can have an afterlife.
Thank you. I see my colleague Brian Moss, his hand is up. Brian?
Yeah, I had a question. It's, I guess, indicative of some of my interests, which are always kind of behind the game and how things come about. I was wondering why the show was at Art and Practice. Was there, who reached out to who, how did this come about? Were there approaches with any other institutions? What was the reaction? That kind of stuff, just anything you could offer.
Shall I dive in with that? A few years ago now, the Getty launched something called the African American Art History Initiative, which is run primarily through the GRI, the Getty Research Institute, where Glenn, Kristen, and I all work. And it was one of the goals of the African American Art History Initiative, or AHI, as we sometimes call it, to partner with local institutions in supporting the shared goals around creating a rich space for scholars to come and do research on African American artists and art history. So the GRI had already been wanting to develop a partnership with Art and Practice and do more work in collaboration with them. So the opportunity came up for us to collaboratively put together an exhibition curated by our team at the GRI and hosted at Art and Practice. So it was really perfect timing and very much in alignment with the goals of the AHI initiative.
Great. Did anybody from Art and Practice participate in, I guess, any sort of curatorial decision making, or was that all you guys?
We've been working really closely with the team at Art and Practice. Oh, sorry, Glenn, were you going to jump in?
Well, I just that, we were really close collaborators and we're meeting every week. I think that, the curatorial decisions in large part were done by this team, but in collaboration with Art and Practice, who, they have the best sense of what's achievable in their space and what works with their audience. So there was lots of consultation back and forth. And then the additional element that's, I think, very important is that Art and Practice has conceived and developed the programming series that goes along with the exhibition. And that's very important because that series, I think, really ties Blondell Cummings' work to the present day, to Los Angeles, to Leimert Park. I think it's through some of the public programming around the show that makes the strongest case about why this matters now and who it matters to, and who are creative people today that are really taking inspiration from that work. So that was another huge element that Art Practice brought to the table.
Cool, thank you.
And I guess for our last word, a question was posed by a student, Gabrielle Jones, also I believe a GRI intern from the summer. She asks, what do you all hope viewers and the audience take away from the Blondell Cummings exhibit? So with a couple minutes and maybe just a few words from each of you, what are your hopes?
That people go to the show and then for the rest of their life, they can say, I know who that is when they see that name. That it's really about getting her name into the public realm. And at this crucial moment, it's at the stage in her legacy where the foundation is laid, or it recedes to be rediscovered later. And we want to make sure that foundation is laid.
I would add that I've had professors in mind ever since we started working on this show. And in addition to wanting everybody to come to the space and see the show and know who Blondell Cummings is, as Glenn just mentioned, I'm eager for professors to discover her work and realize how incredibly relevant her work is to many, many different disciplines, and how much teaching her work could add in a lot of environments.
And I would also, just to kind of synthesize both Glenn and Rebecca, I think we made a deliberate decision to showcase her collaboration. And while this is a practice that really centers Blondell Cummings, whereas in the past it's always been in relationship to those she's worked with, I do hope that when people see, they'll see certain collaborators and they'll be able to have a bigger picture of how she worked with poets, musicians, filmmakers, and she was really at a center point for multidisciplinary practice. So whatever that means, you don't have to be a dancer to enjoy the show. You don't have to be an artist by any means, but if you are, and you work in film or you work in poetry, you'll find elements of that as central components of her work.
Well, thank you so much for your time this afternoon. Thank you to the audience for all of your patience. And I cannot wait to read the publication and to visit Art in Practice. So everyone stay well.
Thank you, Damon.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Bye.